everybody. This is Scoot to Kenyatta here at Club 107 with Hugh. And Hugh's been working on Omani's case. Omani is one of Lucasville 5. Go ahead, you introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I've been in touch with Omani maybe past 6 or 7 years, and was working on it especially a few years ago. After 2016 and the prisoners' strike that happened nationally, I've been part of a collective called Tightline Radio, which basically exists to boost prisoners' voices in the prisoner movement. And, you know, especially with, I've been glad for the more momentum around Omani's case, but there's also just this, you know, the fucked up fact that he's facing execution next year. So, you know, we're trying to think about this. I think that the Lucasville Uprising is just this really important reference point. It's, you know, at a time in the 90s when a lot of the prisoner movements had been suppressed. Like, we're in touch with a lot of folks in Indiana and the IDOC, and there was a whole movement in the 70s and 80s, and you know, it was pretty continuous, where the IDOC couldn't put people down, where especially a lot of old heads who came out of Black Power struggles in the late 60s and early 70s went into prison. They were able to effectively spread organizing, spread struggles throughout the system, and that happened all through the 80s. You know, one of the climaxes was the 85 Pendleton Uprising, and you know, but by the end of the 80s, early 90s, what a lot of those dudes say is that IDOC figured out a playbook of just totally isolating militants and putting people down, and then at the same time introducing television and things like that to just, you know, depoliticize the prison population. And so in the early 90s, at least in Indiana, but I think in a lot of places around the US, you know, just things died down. It didn't mean that there wasn't violence. It didn't mean that there wasn't insane white supremacist repression in the prisons, but there just wasn't around the country much of a prisoners movement left. And so I think that, you know, Lucasville stands out in a moment when just things have been put down all over the country, that there was the strength of that struggle, that it had this multiracial dimension, that prisoners held out as long as they did, and that it was able to engender, you know, all this outside support. I think it's really inspiring. And so part of what Omani's case is about is putting down that memory and saying that, you know, for anyone who wasn't going to snitch in a situation like that, for anyone who participated, I know that's like a, you know, it's a subtle point when it comes to Omani, because he wasn't actually inside during the uprising itself, but for people who were in part of that moment, you know, the state's message has been, how do we put people down? You know, how do we bury them? You know, in Omani's case, how do we kill them? And so for me, it's also a matter of, you know, the state wanting to kill the memory of that kind of solidarity and that kind of strength. And so if we can fight for Omani's freedom, not just him not getting killed, but his actual freedom, and also all the other Lucasville prisoners who are still down on that, then that's also a way of affirming that whole experience and everything it stood for at a really bleak moment when not much was popping off, despite how bad it was. Sorry to go on so long, but
No problem, but hopefully this is the beginning of what, you know, starting out to be the 30-year anniversary next year of the Lucasville Uprising Conference, you know. For details, you know, to be upcoming. Thank you, Hugh.
yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, you're welcome.